When Monica Wright stepped onto that jet bridge, she never imagined her day would end in a public spectacle. One minute she was settling into seat 2A, admiring the polished leather and the extra legroom, and the next minute a flight attendant was barking orders, insisting she step off the plane. No explanation, no apology, just the assumption that a young black woman in a faded tee and scuffed sneakers could not possibly afford a first-class ticket. As security escorted her down the aisle, their grip on her arms like shackles, the cabin fell silent. Passengers stared straight ahead, pretending not to see her humiliation, while the man who had stolen her seat kept his eyes glued to his phone. It was cruel, calculated, and staged for maximum embarrassment. They scanned her boarding pass 3 times, each beep a gauntlet thrown at her dignity. The agent muttered under her breath about point redemptions and corporate perks like it was a crime to pay your own way. When they summoned a supervisor to confirm her ticket, the glare she received felt colder than any airport metal detector. Monica said nothing. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just obeyed, walking off that plane as if she were the one under arrest. And yet, even without raising her voice, she left a fracture in their assumptions, though she wouldn't know it until the next morning. By the time she woke up, news headlines were buzzing about a lost $4 billion investment deal. Analysts scrambled to explain the sudden withdrawal of Bastion Equity Partners from Orion Air's expansion plans. No one made the connection between the corporate ledger and the woman they had publicly shamed. But Monica did. She was the one holding the pen, the same one she used to ink agreements worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. The damage had been done in ink that dried before they realized they'd humiliated her. That afternoon, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, Monica approached the check-in counter at Orion International Airport. Her carry-on trailed behind her like a loyal dog, wheels clicking against the tile floor. She wore a simple white tee soft from hundreds of washes, faded blue jeans, and gray sneakers that had seen her through late-night trading sessions and whirlwind cross-country flights. Her black hair was wound into a lazy bun, and the only accessory she sported was a battered leather bracelet, her mother's keepsake. On her shoulder hung a gray backpack stuffed with a laptop and a cold storage crypto wallet, hardware capable of moving millions in seconds. She blended into the crowd because discretion was her most valuable currency. Monica had arrived 2 hours early, not to fuss, but because timing was everything in her world. While most travelers treat first class as a luxury, she viewed it as an operational edge. Faster boarding, better rest, quicker exit. She needed every advantage when you were quietly investing in the future of sustainable aviation fuel. As she reached for her phone to pull up her mobile boarding pass, the agent behind the desk looked up with a smile that died the instant she saw Monica's name on the screen. There was a flicker of skepticism in the agent's eyes, subtle but telling. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice clipped. Monica offered her passport and phone as if she were carrying nothing more scandalous than a sandwich. The scan took longer than necessary, the agent's lips tightening with each passing second. "This is for first class, correct?" she asked, as though Monica was playing a prank. "Yes," Monica replied, steady and calm. "It was booked under Bastion Equity Partners, corporate ledger transfer. That should have ended the matter." Bastion was a heavyweight in the finance world, but the agent leaned closer, her nostrils flaring as if she could smell deception. Monica recognized that look from boardrooms and five-star restaurants, the surprise that a black woman without designer labels could wield that kind of power. Without a word, the agent picked up the phone and murmured something inaudible. 5 minutes later, she handed the next boarding pass to a sharply dressed man whose Rolex winked beneath his cuff. "Good evening, Mr. Langford. Off to Geneva again?" she cooed. Monica's phone buzzed with a message from her assistant confirming tomorrow's meeting. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, watching the man glide away without a hitch. When the agent finally returned to her station, her smile was strained. "Here's your boarding pass, Ms. Wright," she said, the apology forced. Then, lowering her voice so only Monica could hear, she added, "You understand how things are these days. You'd be surprised how many people try to sneak into first class." Monica's gaze was cool, but inside her mind the gears began to turn. "I'm not surprised," she said, turning on her heel and walking toward security without another word. Monica moved through the TSA pre-check line as if she belonged there, shoulder back, chin up. But at the metal detector, the officer's expression shifted. He was built like a linebacker, close-cropped hair, stubble on his jaw, scanning her with the same doubt the gate agent had shown. "Ma'am," he said flatly, waving her to the side. The scanner beeped faintly and he declared a random screening, directing her to a secondary checkpoint as if she were the only one on the planet under suspicion. A female officer with latex gloves approached, reciting the pat-down protocol like a script. Arms out, feet apart. Monica complied without flinching. Behind her, the male agent rifled through her backpack and produced a sleek silver device. "What's this?" he asked, eyebrows arched. "Digital asset wallet," she replied evenly. "Crypto." He looked disappointed, as though it wasn't dangerous enough. "Need to check it for explosives," he said, striding off without waiting for a response. As she stood there, cool as the linoleum floor beneath her, Monica felt eyes tracing her movements. A mother clutched her child tighter. A businessman in loafers and cufflinks shot her a glare over his newspaper. She absorbed it all, filing away each look of scorn as if it were data in her ledger. When the male agent finally returned the wallet with a sigh, she picked up her bag and slipped back into her shoes without a word. The woman officer stepped back, having completed her part in the charade. "You're free to go," she said with a nod that lacked any warmth. Monica lifted her bag, her posture immaculate, and walked through the exit of the screening area. Each step echoed in her ears like a metronome marking the beat of a plan taking shape. She counted the gates as she strolled through the terminal. A6, A8, A10, A12, each one a milepost to her silent resolution. The first-class lounge sat beyond frosted glass doors etched with the airline's silver emblem. But she didn't go inside just yet. Instead, she claimed a spot by a window overlooking the tarmac, the late afternoon sun painting the runway in molten gold. Leaning against the cool glass, Monica let her mind reset. She wasn't angry, at least not yet. What she felt ran deeper than fury. It was a quiet determination, a tightening pressure in her chest, like the cabin filling with air before takeoff. Around her, travelers checked their watches and tapped their shoes impatiently, none of them noticing the storm gathering in that silent corner. She took a slow breath and thought back to how the world saw her, an unassuming traveler in worn-out sneakers, not the woman who moved more money before breakfast than most people saw in a lifetime. She reminded herself that respect couldn't be purchased at check-in, it had to be earned. But when the system kept breathing doubt onto you, sometimes you had to build your own runway and land your own plane. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the terminal floor, Monica let the memory of every slight settle into her bones. This was no random inconvenience. It was a pattern, a sequence of microaggressions designed to push her back. Well, she thought quietly, the next flight out wasn't going to be one they boarded with ease. She tucked her boarding pass into her pocket, her jaw set, and the first notes of her plan began to play. In that moment, the arc of power shifted. Monica Wright was no longer the invisible passenger. She was the architect of her own reckoning, and everyone on that plane, in that airport, would learn that underestimating her was the gravest mistake they could make. The loop had begun, and by the time they realized what was happening, she would already have landed her greatest comeback. Monica glanced at her watch again. 30 minutes until boarding. Every second ticking past felt like a drumbeat in her chest, marking the countdown to her reckoning. A message lit up her phone screen. Board meeting at 10 o'clock. Investor votes secure. See you in Zurich. She slid the phone back into her pocket with the calm precision of someone who had orchestrated this moment months ago. None of the people who had doubted her today, the TSA officer who had patted her down, the check-in agent who had scanned her pass like it was counterfeit, the lounge receptionist who had steered her away from the dining room had any idea that this was personal. They were about to learn that underestimating Monica Wright was the gravest error they could make. The polished marble floor of the Polaris lounge reflected the warm glow of brass sconces. Soft jazz floated through concealed speakers, weaving between clusters of cognac-sipping executives and polished retirees in linen jackets. Overhead, recessed lights cast a honeyed sheen on dark wood paneling. A long row of windows framed a runway where a jumbo jet blinked its red navigation lights against an evening sky. The air smelled faintly of roasted almonds and aftershave. Monica inhaled, letting the scene wash over her. She belonged here just as much as anyone, possibly more. But tonight, this sanctuary of privilege would become a theater for her silent, deadly performance. She approached the concierge desk, where a slate-gray uniformed attendant waited with an air of studied calm. Monica placed her boarding pass on the marble without a word. The attendant's eyes flicked from the pass to Monica's scuffed sneakers, then to the leather bracelet on her wrist. A keepsake from her mother, worn and cracked but priceless in its sentiment. An imperceptible frown crossed the attendant's features, as though she was appraising whether someone who looked like a graduate student belonged in this setting. The attendant tapped the pass into her terminal, fingers lingering a moment too long on the screen. "May I have your frequent flyer number?" the attendant asked in a measured voice. "I don't carry one," Monica replied evenly. "I'm here on my boarding pass." A flicker of annoyance passed over the attendant's face before she forced back a polite smile. "Our signature dining room is reserved for elite-tier members," she said. "You may use the general seating area with light refreshments." Monica inclined her head once. "Thank you," she said softly, her tone as even as still water. She turned away, stepping through a carved oak arch into the heart of the lounge. Inside, clusters of leather armchairs formed intimate islands beneath hanging lanterns. A couple seated under a chandelier of crystal chatted over a bottle of Dom Perignon. Nearby, an older woman in pearls tasted truffle-topped sliders with a look of bliss. Monica's entrance caused a ripple of glances, brief, curious, dismissive, and then a return to self-absorption. She wove past these scenes, each intended to reassure the privileged that they were among their own. But privilege could not shield them from the storm she carried in her mind. She found an empty seat beside a tall potted fig tree, its leaves glossy in the lounge light. She eased into the cushion as if she had been born to this seat, dropping her backpack at her feet. It was a silent claim staking her membership in this space. Within moments, a well-meaning server rolled a tray of crystal champagne flutes past her. He paused at a table where a tech executive in a bespoke suit raised his glass, then moved on without offering Monica so much as a nod. The server's back receded, leaving her alone with an invisible barrier. 15 minutes passed. Monica's eyes tracked the server delivering hors d'oeuvres to every table. Smoked salmon blinis here, a cheese platter there, but none in her direction. Each slight was deliberate omission. The lounge staff had rehearsed this exclusion like a choreography of disdain. She felt a flash of anger but kept her face composed. No outburst, no scene. She had learned long ago that silence could burn deeper than any shout. Her thoughts turned to the pattern repeating itself. The check-in agent who refused to believe a young black woman could command a corporate ledger. The TSA officer who patted her down as if nationality insecurities seeped from her pores, all feeding into the same conviction: she did not belong. Well, tonight, they would learn how quickly the tables could turn. Monica checked her watch again, 20 minutes until boarding. She reached into her bag and pulled out her briefing folder. The final investor summary lay open on her screen: projected returns, risk assessments, acquisition terms for the hydrogen fuel startup. The numbers glowed in crisp PDF lines. She reviewed them once more to steady herself. Everything was in place. All she needed was to arrive at the boardroom door bearing her presence as proof of her legitimacy. A server emerged with a cart of petit fours and sparkling water. Monica raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said in a light voice. The server stopped, startled, as though a bubble had popped. "May I see a menu?" He fumbled a small leather booklet from a side pouch, flipped through it with obvious discomfort, and then hurried away around a corner, menu in hand. 10 minutes passed. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly. The menu never returned. It was a test, and she had passed it without rising from her seat. At that moment, an announcement crackled. "First-class passengers for Flight 72 to Zurich, please proceed to Gate A12 for boarding." Monica rose, smoothing her trousers. She scanned her reflection in a nearby window. The lounge behind her continued its ritual of exclusion, oblivious to the movement of her determination. She paused at the entrance where the concierge looked up with forced concern. "Everything okay, Ms. Wright?" "Just stretching my legs," Monica replied with a secret smile. The concierge exhaled, relieved, and Monica walked away through the corridor toward her destiny. The terminal hummed with activity. Families clustered near departure boards, business travelers tapped at phones, children tugged at suitcase wheels. Gate A12 was marked by a silver placard beneath recessed lighting. Monica claimed a seat near the boarding podium. She set her bag beside her and leaned back, folding her hands over the strap. The buzz of passengers completing final calls enveloped her. She closed her eyes momentarily, letting her mind replay every instance of today's disrespect. Each slight etched itself deeper into her resolve. 10 minutes until boarding, she sat up as the gate agent's voice echoed, "May I call first class for Flight 72 to Zurich?" Monica rose and fed her pass through the scanner. The indicator flashed amber. The gate agent's practiced smile flickered. "One moment, please," he said, stepping aside. Monica's heart rate ticked upward, but her face remained serene. He stepped to a podium off to the side, gesturing for her to follow. A small crowd watched, curiosity sparking in their eyes. "Name?" asked a second agent seated behind the podium. "Monica Wright, seat 2A, Zurich," she replied clearly. The seated agent's fingers flew over a keyboard. A hush fell over the onlookers. After a tense moment, his voice broke the silence. "Payment flagged for verification. It appears to be crypto-backed." The standing agent glanced at Monica with a thinly veiled apology. "You know how it is," he murmured, as if she bore responsibility for their outdated policies. Monica held his gaze. "Thank you for verifying," she said. She did not sound angry. She sounded measured. "Please proceed." The agent lifted the velvet rope. Monica crossed the threshold deliberately, letting those in line see her pass turn green on the scanner. She walked down the jet bridge and the agents parted for her as though she were parting clouds. On board, the cabin smelled of warmed leather and freshly laundered linens. A flight attendant appeared with a bottle of champagne and 2 crystal flutes. "Ms. Wright, welcome aboard," she said, setting the flute in her hand. "May I offer you a glass?" The champagne's bubbles sparkled in the light. Monica's lips curved into a genuine smile. For the first time since arriving, she felt acknowledged. The passengers seated nearby offered quiet nods of greeting, no one questioning her presence. She placed her bag in the overhead bin, each click of the latch echoing like punctuation. The couple in matching golf jackets, whom she had passed earlier, whispered apologies as she settled into her seat. A business traveler handed her the in-flight menu without prompting. A steward refilled her glass of champagne without waiting. Monica held the flute between her fingers, savoring the moment. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down. Vote passed unanimously. Press release queued. Orion Air shares down 3%. She tapped a response. "Perfect, thank you." The confirmation arrived. "Boardroom is yours. Presentation begins in 2 hours." She set the phone aside, closing her eyes as the plane's engines whirred to life. The captain's voice broke through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the slight delay. We are now cleared for takeoff and expect smooth skies all the way to Zurich." Monica smiled inwardly. No mention of the gate delay, no explanation, just polite service now that she was in her seat. As the plane rolled forward, Monica thought back to the moment at check-in when the agent had asked for additional verification, as though her presence alone could be suspicious. She thought of the TSA officer's perfunctory pat-down, the lounge staff's practiced indifference. Each act of small cruelty had been intended to diminish her. Instead, it had extinguished any pretense of respect they thought they commanded. She had turned their own tools against them. Climbing into the sky, the city's lights shimmered beneath the wings. The terminal grew smaller, its windows fading into a ribbon of luminescence. Monica sipped her champagne, the slight fizz a celebration of her triumph. She lowered her gaze to the table folded out before her, a tablet loaded with press drafts, talking points, and the official announcement of a leadership change at Orient Air. The CEO's name was at the top, followed by a new signature: Monica Wright, incoming board chair. She tapped open the press release. Effective immediately, Orient Air announces appointment of Monica Wright to board chair. The company extends gratitude to outgoing leadership and looks forward to a new era of inclusive growth. She imagined the faces behind those words, the gate agents, the lounge attendants, the airport staff who had dismissed her. They would read those sentences and feel the sting of their own bias. It was far more satisfying than any confrontation. A flight attendant approached to offer a meal selection. Monica requested the salmon entree with grilled asparagus and mashed potatoes. "A fine choice," the attendant said. "And may I top off your glass?" Monica nodded. As the meal arrived, the cabin service transformed around her. Attendants moved with deference, passengers offered her space, and the hum of polite conversation resumed its normal flow. Monica ate slowly, savoring every bite. She allowed herself a moment to feel the full arc of her journey today, from the humiliating removal off the first flight to this ascent above the clouds into her own victory. She thought of her mother's bracelet, its leather worn thin by time. The keepsake had reminded her of her roots, of the resilience passed down from one generation to the next. Now, with the world unfolding beneath her and the promise of Zurich on the horizon, she honored that legacy. When the cabin lights dimmed for an in-flight movie, Monica opened her laptop and drafted a brief email to her team. "Congratulations, everyone. Today we proved discretion is our greatest strength and respect our most powerful currency. The new era begins now." She hit send, leaning back as the screen's glow faded. The movie played, but her mind drifted to the boardroom where her colleagues awaited her arrival. Hours later, the descent into Zurich unfolded like a slow unveiling. The Alps rose below, capped with snow even in late summer. Streamers of city lights curved along the lake's edge. Monica pressed her hand against the window, feeling the plane's gentle bank around the mountains. She closed her eyes, breathing in the cool air that seeped through the seal. When the wheels touched runway 28, there was a collective murmur of approval. Applause rippled through the cabin, an acknowledgement of the flight's smooth arrival. Monica stood, gathering her belongings. As she passed down the aisle, passengers smiled and wished her well. The stewardesses offered final glasses of champagne as she disembarked. Each gesture spoke of the respect she had earned. In the arrival terminal, a cluster of reporters and camera crews waited near a VIP entrance. A banner overhead read, "Welcome Monica Wright, new board chair of Orient Air." Flashbulbs popped as she emerged, wearing a tailored navy skirt suit that matched the precision of her performance. She paused at the head of the red carpet and let the crowd gather around her. A reporter thrust a microphone forward. "Ms. Wright, congratulations on your appointment. What message do you have for the teams here at Zurich?" Monica smiled warmly, her voice calm and assured. "Thank you. My message is simple. Respect should never be withheld, and excellence should never be measured by appearance. We move forward together, building on the strengths of every individual." She turned, acknowledging the applause, then strode toward the exit as the cameras followed. Moments later, Orient Air's CEO appeared on a flat screen in the airport lobby, delivering a statement. Underperforming leadership has been replaced. We welcome Board Chair Monica Wright's vision for inclusive growth." The words scrolled across the ticker feed on every news channel in the terminal. Passengers who had once ignored Monica at the lounge absorbed the breaking news and offered nods of approval, some whispering apologies. Monica navigated through the crowd with grace, her mother's bracelet resting against the sleeve of her suit jacket. The terminal's polished floors reflected the banners proclaiming her arrival. Every flash of the camera, every snippet of her speech, recorded on phones, carried her triumph. She walked to the waiting car with a quiet satisfaction that far surpassed any fleeting victory. As the car pulled away, the runway receded behind her, a path she had already outgrown. In the rearview mirror, she saw the terminal's lights blur, a symbol of the old world's prejudices left in her wake. Ahead lay the boardroom, where her voice would shape strategy, and the global stage where her presence would demand respect. Monica rested her hand on her bracelet and exhaled. The flight had ended, but her journey was only beginning. Monica Wright stepped off the podium with her boarding pass tucked neatly into her leather tote. The gate agent's tight smile still lingered behind her as he mouthed the words, "You're cleared to board." She did not look back. Behind her, a growing line of first-class passengers waited, unaware that the woman at the head of the queue carried far more than luggage. She carried weeks of planning, a ledger of slights, and a quiet promise that every assumption would be paid back in full. She walked down the jet bridge as though she owned every inch of it, her navy kitten heels clicking confidently on the metal grate. Outside, the terminal's fluorescent lights receded behind the thick glass. Inside, the cabin glowed a warm amber under mood lighting. Monica inhaled the scent of leather polish, and citrus air freshener, a fragrance designed to soothe nerves and reassure privilege. She felt none of the reassurance. In her mind, she riffled through every moment of the day's indignities. The check-in agent who had scanned her pass 3 times, the TSA officer who had frisked her in front of bystanders, the Polaris lounge staff who had redirected her to general seating, and finally the flight attendant who had seated her in 2C rather than the 2A she had reserved. Each act had been a demand to prove her belonging. Each had been a brick in the wall of doubt they'd tried to build around her. But doubt was a currency she knew how to spend. She had wired more money across continents in a single hour than most people earned in a year. She had negotiated board seats for billion-dollar startups before breakfast. The woman they doubted was about to authorize a $250 million decision that would reshape the future of sustainable aviation fuel. They did not know, they would not know, until the deal closed and the ink dried in their boardroom, long after the cabin doors shut behind her. First class was nearly full when she reached row 2. Passengers reclined in their plush cream leather seats, reading tablets, unleashing magazines, and sipping pre-departure champagne. The man occupying 2A looked up as she approached, his brow knitting for a fraction of a second before sliding back into complacence. He was tall, tanned from weekend golf outings, his Portland, Maine sports coat tailored to fit broad shoulders, his elbow draped possessively over the armrest. The subtle claim of ownership that said, "I belong here, above all else." "Excuse me?" Monica said, her voice calm enough to soothe a frightened child, firm enough to steer a board meeting. He lowered his magazine. "This is my seat," she added, holding up her boarding pass where the 2A glowed under the overhead light. His eyes flicked from pass to face, confusion crinkling his forehead, giving way to entitlement. "Well," he said finally, "I've been here since boarding started. Maybe you're on the other side, 2B?" He pointed across the aisle at an empty seat. Monica's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "No," she said quietly. "I'm in 2A." The attendant appeared beside them, her tailored uniform crisp, her smile fixed. "Is there a problem?" she asked, voice pitched slightly too high. Monica repeated her claim. The attendant lifted the man's pass. 2C, she read. "Sir, your seat is 2C. Would you mind switching?" Ms. Wright will take 2A. The man glanced at her as though she had two heads. Can't you just move Ms. Wright to 2C? The attendant suggested. It's easier. Monica studied him. He shrugged as though shrugging off a puppy's guilt. The attendant's eyes flicked to Monica, the silent question, will you be the one to cause trouble? She drew a long breath. She could demand a supervisor, she could refuse, she could storm off and find another way to Zurich, but that would be the disruption they so feared. Instead, she nodded once and followed the attendant to 2C, each step measured, each thought catalogued like evidence in a file. She would not give them the spectacle of her anger. She would give them something far more insidious, her silence. She settled into the windowless aisle seat. The seat width was 30 inches, the legroom 35 inches, cozy compared to the 40-inch she had paid for. The man in 2A sank back into his reclaimed domain, reopening his magazine with a satisfied grunt. The attendant passed with a cart of welcome drinks, offering champagne to the man and the passenger in 2B, but skipping Monica entirely. No look, no question, no acknowledgement beyond the whir of the cart's wheels. She did not flinch. She did not call him out. She simply watched and remembered. 15 minutes later, the cabin lights dimmed for safety instructions. The co-pilot's voice crackled overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 72 to Zurich. Please direct your attention to the following safety demonstration. Various passengers reclined to watch. Monica observed from her seat. Golden champagne flutes tinkling, tray tables unfolding in synchrony, belts clicking into place. In that microcosm of privilege, she identified a pattern. Serve those who fit the mold, ignore those who do not. Dress exclusion as policy. She had learned that policy could be dismantled if only one knew which bricks to pry out. Dinner service began 20 minutes into the flight. Menus circulated down the aisle. When the flight attendant reached Monica's row, she lowered a menu into Monica's lap without making eye contact and moved on. Lacking any other options, Monica accepted the menu. Sea bass, filet mignon, or vegetarian risotto. Choices framed as luxury. She chose the sea bass and sparkling water, her mind barely on appetite. The man in 2A ordered his filet, medium rare with a glass of Cabernet. The attendant nodded at him, sealed in his entitlement. Then she turned to Monica, offering no courtesy of confirmation or thanks. Sea bass and sparkling water, Monica repeated. The attendant noted it briskly and returned to the galley. By now, the invisible current in the cabin was taut with tension. Passengers felt it too, an undercurrent of something unspoken, a ripple in the smooth veneer of service. Monica sat in her narrow seat, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Better to endure a minor discomfort than to give them the satisfaction of spectacle. She had endured worse, boardrooms where men doubted her credentials until she produced bank statements, five-star hotels where concierges assumed she was the assistant rather than the keynote speaker. The airport was only an earlier stage of the same show. Tonight, she would be the pivot point that forced reality to bend. Her sea bass arrived 10 minutes later, plated with asparagus tips and a lemon butter sauce. She noted the difference. His plate had been delivered flawlessly timed. Hers arrived with a subtle jerk of the wrist, as though the attendant had hurried to ship it off. She tasted the fish, firm, salted, perfectly. She let the flavors settle in her mouth even as she cataloged every slight. The pause at check-in, the frisk at security, the lounge's silent banishment, the forced seat change, the omitted champagne, the clipped dinner service. Each act an indicator light on the dashboard of bias. She lifted her sparkling water and drank slowly, the bubbles climbing to her throat. Outside, the aircraft's wingtip navigational light pulsed red against the night. Inside, the man in 2A leafed through his sports magazine again, oblivious. Down the aisle, the passenger in pearls giggled with the attendant, sharing a joke at Monica's expense. She saw it in their expressions. Eyes flicked to Monica's seat, half-second to assess if she was truly passenger or just decoration. She felt none of the embarrassment they intended. She felt only the quiet power of anticipation. When the meal trays were collected, the cabin lights dimmed further for in-flight entertainment. Monica powered on her tablet and opened the investor brief she had prepared. Financial forecasts, risk analyses, board presentation slides. In a few hours, she would step into her Zurich boardroom not as an underdressed anomaly, but as the chairwoman empowered by overwhelming support. Tonight, this flight was her crucible. She had let them test her belonging. Now she would prove it. She drafted a quick email to her assistant. Final press release. Orion Air leadership change, effective immediately. Please circulate at 2:00 Zurich time. Include note on mandatory bias training. She hit send. A moment later, a reply popped up. Understood. Draft attached. She smiled faintly as the airplane hummed through the night sky. Altitude 35,000 feet, cruising speed 560 miles per hour. Below lay thousands of miles of darkness. Above, only the slope of her resolve toward dawn. Hours passed in that suspended limbo. Occasionally a passenger stirred or cabin crew glided by with water bottles. Monica closed her eyes, letting the rhythmic drone of the engines wash over her. She thought of the gate agent's reluctant permission, the lounge's dismissal, the flight attendant's omissions, each act of deliberate exclusion a plea for her to leave. Instead, she remained, a singular presence, impossible to ignore. As the captain announced initial descent, the cabin lights brightened slightly. The in-flight movie credits rolled. Monica gathered her belongings, laptop, phone, travel folder. She zipped her tote and stepped into the aisle. Passengers shifted aside, some offering polite nods as though sensing they should now acknowledge her. The man in 2A slid his magazine into his bag and straightened his tie, avoiding eye contact. The Pearl's passenger murmured a quiet apology. "I thought you were the assistant." Monica inclined her head graciously and said nothing. She did not need to. She walked down the jet bridge, leaving behind the cabin's amber glow. The Swiss night air washed over her as she emerged into the arrival hall. Television screens blared headlines. Monica Wright named chair of Orion Air Board, and airline shares slide after leadership shakeup. Airport staff and reporters gathered at the VIP exit. Flashbulbs popped, microphones thrust forward. A reporter called out, "Ms. Wright, what do you say to passengers who felt slighted by today's events?" She paused beneath the atrium's glass canopy. Her bracelet, her mother's gift, rested at her wrist, weathered leather against fine wool. She met the sea of cameras with a measured smile. "Inclusive leadership demands inclusive treatment," she said clearly. "No passenger should ever be subjected to delay or doubt because of appearance or background. We are implementing mandatory anti-bias training for every Orion Air employee from check-in to cabin crew. Respect is not optional." Behind her, the outgoing CEO stepped forward, shoulders squared. "On behalf of Orion Air, I apologize to Ms. Wright and to any passenger who has felt unwelcome. We commit to these reforms wholeheartedly." The cameras clicked furiously. Monica nodded once, then turned and walked toward the awaiting car, her steps steady on the polished floor. As she slid into the back seat and the doors closed, she exhaled. The terminal's lights faded in the window behind her, a blur of privilege left behind. Ahead lay Zurich's boardroom, a space she had earned through every slight endured and every whisper cataloged. Tonight, she would reshape policy, not through confrontation but through action. She would prove that respect could be bought only with commitment and enforced by leadership, and the ledger would balance at last. The car pulled away from the curb and merged into the traffic flowing along the Lake Zurich promenade. Wind gusted through the open window, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of change. Monica lifted her hand, feeling the cool breeze against her skin, then lowered it as a final resolve settled in her heart. The flight was over. The journey had only begun. Monica's sea bass sat on the tray table in front of her, the flesh barely warm and the asparagus limp as though it had ridden out turbulence in the overhead bin. There was no bread basket beside it, and her wine glass remained empty despite her request 10 rows back. She didn't blink. She laid her cloth napkin across her lap, picked up her fork, and began eating with the grace of someone who'd learned long ago that the true nourishment in life often came from silence, and from letting others fill that space with their own assumptions. Halfway through her meal, the plane jolted as it hit a pocket of rough air. The man in 2A, Mr. Keller, let out a frustrated curse under his breath as a bead of his unwatched wine splashed onto his sleeve. The flight attendant rushed over with napkins, her face animated with concern. "Is everything all right, Mr. Keller?" she asked, dabbing at his armrest. He waved her away. "I could have used a heads up," he muttered loudly. "Not all of us have these little computers glued to our ears." The attendant glanced at Monica as she straightened a loose strand of hair. "Some passengers are more sensitive to changes in altitude," she said in an undertone meant only for those who cared to listen. That half-whisper carried the weight of every excuse they'd ever made to dismiss Monica's presence. Monica met her eyes, steady and deliberate, and held her gaze for an extra second. Then the attendant looked away and hurried back down the aisle. 10 minutes later, a younger flight attendant, soft-spoken, wide-eyed, approached Monica's seat. "Ms. Wright?" she asked quietly. Monica nodded. "I was asked to check if everything's all right for you. If there's anything you need adjusted." Monica set down her fork, her movements unhurried. "Who asked?" she said calmly. "The purser," the attendant replied, her voice faltering. "There's been some discomfort mentioned." "Discomfort?" Monica repeated. "From whom?" "I'm not at liberty to say," the attendant whispered. Monica closed her eyes briefly. "Then let me say this. I haven't raised my voice. I haven't violated any policy. I haven't left my seat, and yet I've been moved from 2A, spoken to with condescension, ignored during service, and now I'm a cause of discomfort." The attendant's shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm just relaying a message." Monica leaned forward. "You can relay this back. I expect no special treatment. I only expect the same respect anyone else paid for first class gets." The young attendant nodded, mumbled an apology, and slipped away. When the cabin lights dimmed fully for the overnight flight, Monica reclined silently into her makeshift flatbed. Outside, the stars blinked distant beyond the pressurized glass. She did not sleep. She watched, she recorded, she cataloged every glance, every whispered word, every systematic omission. This wasn't just about that meal tray or a seat assignment. It was about prejudice woven so deeply into every protocol they'd designed to feel neutral. In this hush, Monica's resolve crystallized. She didn't reach for the call button. She didn't create a scene. Instead, she unbuckled with the same calm precision she used when presenting multi-million-dollar proposals. She rose, her heels clicking softly on the carpeted floor, and walked past rows of half-sleeping passengers. Their heads turned only halfway, curiosity warring with fatigue. She didn't look at them. She didn't need to. The moment carried its own gravity. She stepped through the curtain into the front galley. A flight attendant, not the one who'd overseen her seat change, but a younger man with his headset askew, looked up in surprise. "Ma'am, you can't be up here," he stammered. Monica met his eyes. "If you need me, I'm off the passenger path," she said quietly. "I'll return before landing." "Off the plane?" he echoed, bewildered. "Off the path," she clarified, and then she pressed on. Ahead of her stood a narrow door labeled "Authorized Personnel Only." It led to the secure systems bay, normally locked to all but high-clearance crew and airline executives. Monica paused just long enough to let its significance register. This was beyond the galley. This was the nerve center of the flight's communications. She stepped in front of the scanner. A soft beep turned green. The door clicked open. Inside, cool air hissed as vents pushed oxygenated cold through the cramped corridor. A single overhead light illuminated a sealed terminal mounted on the bulkhead. Monica knelt before it and withdrew a slim digital keycard from the inner seam of her jacket, an asset no one aboard had suspected she carried. She slid it into the port. The terminal lit up, lines of code scrolling across its screen. "Welcome, Ms. Wright," it read. She tapped the display, selected a contact marked LMC, then pressed her thumb onto the biometric sensor. A click, a pause, then a calm voice crackled through the secure channel. "We weren't expecting this call until Zurich. Everything on schedule?" it asked. "Not exactly," Monica replied. "We have a situation here. I need final authorization." "Effective immediately," came the response. "Copy that. Transferring executive access to mobile protocol, full control enabled. Do you want the board looped in?" "Not yet," Monica said. "I'll handle it on landing." "Understood. Flight manifest adjusted per directive." Click. The channel closed. Monica withdrew the keycard, pocketed it, and exhaled. She rose and returned to the galley where the young attendant stood slack-jawed. "All good," Monica said with a small nod. "I'll be back in my seat." His confusion softened into respect as she passed. Back in 2C, she fastened her belt and closed her eyes briefly, not to sleep but to listen. The cabin felt different now, quieter, electric with the knowledge that someone in this plane held real power. She replayed every slight from the day, the check-in agent's suspicion, the TSA pat-down, the lounge exclusion, the seat swap, the meal omission, the whispered complaints. All of it had led to this break. When the captain's voice announced initial descent into Zurich, Monica slid her travel folder onto her lap. A final message appeared on her phone. "Room secured, boardroom level 5, 3 executives present, ETA 5 minutes." She glanced up at the gauzy curtain that separated first class from the rest of the cabin, her temporary frontier. She stood, collected her belongings, and moved down the aisle. Her passage caused heads to turn, some in curiosity, some in newfound respect. None openly hostile. Through the jet bridge, she heard the murmur of landing gear and the hiss of hydraulic brakes. At the terminal exit, cameras flashed as she emerged into Zurich's cool evening. Reporters waited with microphones. Television screens above blared headlines of her appointment as board chair and the plunge in Orion Air stock. A reporter called out, "Ms. Wright, how do you respond to today's events on board?" Monica paused beneath the glass atrium. She met the sea of lenses with steady calm. "Inclusive leadership demands inclusive treatment," she said. "We will institute mandatory anti-bias training for every Orion Air employee, from check-in to cabin crew. No passenger should ever be doubted or delayed because of appearance or background." Behind her, the outgoing CEO stepped forward with an apology, and cameras clicked furiously. But Monica said nothing more. She turned, walked past the flashing bulbs, and boarded the waiting car, her mother's leather bracelet snug at her wrist. The only proof she needed of where her strength came from. The car wove through Zurich's rain-slicked streets en route to the company headquarters. Lights danced on the Limit River as Monica gazed out the window. The terminal's luminous grid faded behind her, the old world of casual prejudice receding. Ahead lay the boardroom, a place she had earned through every slight endured, every assumption overturned. Tonight, she would set new operating rules and show them precisely what respect demanded. The car pulled to a stop in front of a sleek glass and steel building gleaming under Zurich's pale streetlights. Monica Wright stepped out onto the wet pavement, her heels clicking softly against the stone. She glanced up at the sign, Meridian Atlantic Holdings Headquarters, then back to the man in the navy suit who held the discreet black badge embossed with silver. "Director Crane is expecting you," he said, leading her through security into a silent lobby lined with muted gray carpeting and frosted glass doors. Her footsteps echoed as she entered the Board Executive Lounge, Operations West. Inside, William Crane, CFO of Orion Air, stood behind a glossy walnut table, flanked by Thomas Vayner, head of fleet strategy, and Marcus Dale, chief innovation officer. Their faces were taut with surprise, and something like apprehension. None of them had ever met her in person, yet they all knew her name from the countless memos outlining the final tranche of the $280 million 0-cents hydrogen fuel deal. They fell silent when she appeared in the doorway, polite nods betraying their discomfort. "Ms. Wright," Crane said, attempting calm, "we weren't expecting you until tomorrow's investor review panel." Monica closed the door behind her and crossed to the head of the table. "I apologize for the early arrival," she said evenly, "but I preferred to discuss a few matters before the scheduled meeting." She set her tote on a nearby chair and took a seat, facing each of them in turn. The low hum of the building's climate control filled the momentary hush. Crane gestured to a seat across from him. "Please, have a seat." Monica inclined her head, but she remained standing. Her presence filled the room with quiet authority. "I trust you're aware of the events aboard Flight 72 to Zurich," she began. The three executives exchanged anxious glances. "You mean the procedural boarding checks," Vayner said, his voice measured. "We understand there was some confusion over seating." "Confusion?" Monica repeated, her eyebrows lifting. "Let's call it what it was. A sequence of racially motivated assumptions, procedural overreach, and willful exclusion that extended from check-in to in-flight service." She paused as the words landed between them. "I endured a random security pat-down, was redirected in your Polaris lounge, forced from my paid seat, ignored at dinner, and then accused of causing discomfort, all before I reached your runway." Dale shifted in his seat. "I'm sorry you felt uncomfortable, Ms. Wright, but our processes are designed for safety and service." Monica let a single breath out. "Your processes were weaponized by prejudice this afternoon. They treated me like an intruder in a plane I paid for, in a lounge I earned access to, in a seat I reserved, and no one here, no one at any level, saw fit to intervene until I proved my credentials." She leaned forward, hands clasped. "That ends now." She reached into her tote and withdrew a slim tablet. "This," she said, tapping the screen, "is the final authorization for the hydrogen fuel acquisition. It will close by day's end. You will execute the $480 million 0-cents transfer as outlined, but more importantly, you will implement immediate corporate reforms." Crane cleared his throat. "What kind of reforms?" Monica held his gaze. "Mandatory anti-bias training for every employee, from check-in to cabin crew, lounge staff to flight operations. A dedicated hotline monitored at executive level for any reported discrimination. Transparent seat assignment audits to ensure no passenger is sidelined based on appearance. And a public apology to your customers for failing to uphold the company's standards of inclusivity." Vayner's face paled. "That's quite a list." "And one more thing," Monica continued. "Your lead flight attendant who asked me to move seats and accused me of discomfort, she will receive remedial coaching and if necessary be reassigned. Your lounge manager, your gate agents, the security supervisor, they will all undergo review. We will not tolerate a single exception." A heavy silence settled. Crane swallowed. "I see. These measures will be costly." Monica allowed a small smile. "Respect and fairness are not optional line items. They are the foundation of your business. If you jeopardize them, you jeopardize everything you stand for." She tapped her tablet again. "I've already wired the funds. The board will receive notification within the hour. This deal secures your company's future in sustainable fuel. If you uphold your end now." Dale straightened in relief. "We will implement these changes immediately, Ms. Wright. You have our commitment." Monica nodded sharply. "Good. Then I will see you all at the investor review in 3 hours. I expect detailed progress reports on my desk by then." Without another word, she turned and left the room, her heels clicking with purpose down the polished corridor. Outside, the lobby lights reflected off the glass walls. Employees passed in muted suits, unaware that the company's direction had shifted irrevocably. Monica stepped into the elevator and rode down in silence. the doors opening to the street level. Back at the hospital for her flight home, Monica recalled how control had felt elusive this afternoon. She thought of the man in 2A, smug in his assumption of ownership, and the crew members who let bias pass as policy. She felt neither vindictive joy nor triumphant glee, only a clear satisfaction that systems designed to silence her had now become the very channels she used to enforce change. Her phone buzzed with messages, confirmation that the deal closed, corporate-wide emails detailing the anti-bias training schedule, apologies drafted for public release, and board minutes updated with her directive. That evening, her inbox filled with notes from employees expressing hope that change might ripple beyond just Orion Air to the entire airline industry, even to other sectors where prejudicial protocols went unchecked. When she returned home the next morning, Monica sat at her kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, the dawn light filtering through lace curtains. A television in the corner played morning headlines. Orion Air shares rally after leadership reforms. Passengers praise new anti-bias policies. Monica Wright, the woman who rewrote the rules. She allowed herself a moment to smile. Her mother's leather bracelet rested on her wrist, worn from years of daily wear. It reminded her of where she came from and why she was determined never to accept diminishment, even in places that felt most exclusive. Respect could not be purchased, but it could be commanded through integrity and decisive action. Later that week, Monica received an invitation to keynote a global aviation conference on diversity and inclusion. As she prepared her speech, she reflected on how small moments, the extra scan of a boarding pass, the casual condescension, the forced seat change, could compound into a pattern of exclusion. She knew better now than ever that one must not only endure but also remember, catalog, and then transform systems from within. On the day of the conference, she stood on the stage before a packed auditorium in Chicago. She began her talk not with technical data, but with the story of her journey on Flight 72, the indignities, the silence, the resolved calm that led her to secure a $250 million deal and corporate overhaul in one flight. People listened, rapt, as she described how bias masqueraded as process and how processes could be redesigned to uphold dignity. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet in applause. In that moment, Monica realized that retribution need not be loud or vindictive. True power lay in precision, in calm determination, and in the ability to reshape systems so they served everyone, not just the privileged few. As she stepped off the stage, a conference organizer handed her a copy of her speech. She glanced at the cover, where her name appeared in bold letters. She allowed herself one small thought. The view she paid for once came with assumptions of exclusion, but now, the gates had opened for good, and any system built on bias would be rebuilt on equity, one policy at a time. Marcy Layton nodded, her voice steady. Yes, she gave me the chance to understand what I almost destroyed. There was a murmur in the room, a unity of recognition among flight attendants, gate agents, and customer service reps. They leaned forward, some bowing heads, all acutely aware that this wasn't corporate training. It was a reckoning. Monica's intervention had rippled through the company, but here, in a Dallas-Fort Worth conference room, those ripples were meeting concrete reality. The Human First, Equity in the Sky pilot cohort beta program was no longer theory. It was the living consequence of a single passenger's refusal to be invisible. Marcy tapped the whiteboard again. We served hundreds of first-class meals that day. We processed dozens of boarding passes. We smiled blankly instead of asking, "How can I help?" Because we thought we already knew who belonged here. But belonging is not a look, it's an act of service. It's the assumption you make before a policy check, an assumption that every passenger has a name and a story. At the front of the room, a man in a dark suit shifted in his seat. He was the head of customer experience, a VP whose title once felt untouchable. "Marcy," he said quietly. "We're grateful you spoke up. But if I'm honest, I'm terrified. How many flights just this week have had similar incidents we didn't see?" The room fell silent. The question hung in the air like a challenge. The woman beside him, a veteran gate supervisor, swallowed. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've been on the job 20 years. I've seen faces stream through our counters. I've had cursory checks, polite refusals, but I never realized I was part of a system that assumed certain people had no place here." Marcy closed her eyes and exhaled. "That's why we're here. This isn't about blame. It's about vigilance. It's about transforming our reflexes from suspicion to courtesy." A junior flight attendant in the first row raised her hand, her uniform crisp but her expression anxious. "Ms. Layton, what do we do when the system triggers a random check? How do we ask without offending? I still worry about safety protocols." Marcy smiled, a real gentle smile that reached her eyes. "You explain. You say, 'We follow procedures for everyone. Thank you for your patience.' You don't whisper suspicion. You don't single someone out. You make it clear this is standard for every passenger, without exception." Across the room, the Chief Innovation Officer, Marcus Dale, leaned forward, pen poised. "And if they question it?" he asked. "If they ask why they were chosen?" "Then you apologize sincerely," Marcy said, "and you explain that we're committed to equitable treatment. If they have concerns, we escalate immediately. That is the policy we write today." She tapped her pen on the board. "No more passive-aggressive comments, no more skewed service. Equity means everyone gets the same dignity." Behind her, a projector screen lit up with bullet points. Standardized boarding script, universal lounge access protocol, equal in-flight service checklists, mandatory empathy training. Each slide represented a policy change born from one passenger's refusal to accept second-class treatment in first class. Monica watched from the back row, arms folded, quietly absorbing the full measure of systemic change she had catalyzed. She had not wanted spectacle, she had wanted reform. And here it was taking shape, one policy at a time. After 2 hours of frank discussion, the group broke for a short break. Monica remained seated, her gaze on the screen. A young gate agent approached her, voice tentative. "Mrs. Wright, I just wanted to say thank you. I was on flight 901 and I didn't realize how much I was missing." Monica offered a warm nod. "Thank you for saying that. Change starts when we admit what we didn't see." The agent's eyes glistened. "I will do better," he said, and Monica knew he meant it. When the session resumed, William Crane joined the circle, his corporate suit offset by a humbled posture. "Ms. Wright," he began, voice thick, "I want to apologize again, not for the sake of press, but because I'm sorry. We failed you as a customer and as a person. I've been briefed on the policy changes. I want to personally fund an expansion of this program to all crew." Monica looked at him directly. "I appreciate that, but I need more than funding. I need your leadership. I need you to model this behavior at every level. If you promise me genuine accountability, I'll stay invested." Crane's nod was immediate. "It's a promise." At that moment, a loud ping echoed from Marcus Dale's phone. He glanced down and his face paled. "The Bastion Trust has just increased scrutiny," he said, voice tight. "They want weekly compliance reports. They want evidence this program is working. They've already removed us from one green investment index." The phrase, "removed us," hit like punctuation. The world was watching. Monica rose slowly. "Then let's give them what they want." She pointed to the screen behind her. Real-time dashboards tracking equity metrics, passenger surveys with anonymous feedback, quarterly external audits, and a public scorecard. She paused, letting each demand land. "If you're serious about transformation, you'll do this. If not, you'll watch investors walk away, and they won't ask for apologies. They'll ask for someone else to run the show." Silence followed. The executives looked at one another, then back at Monica, and Crane's jaws clenched. "We'll implement everything," he said, voice firm. "Weekly reports, public scorecards, all of it." Monica nodded once. "Good, because this isn't charity. It's business continuity. It's brand survival." She gathered her folder and turned away, heels clicking on the polished floor. She paused in the doorway and looked back. "One more thing," she said without turning. Her voice edged with quiet steel. "Tell your head of in-fleet operations that next time his staff profiles a passenger, they might want to confirm that passenger owns a stake in the company." Then she left the room. The door closed softly behind her. Inside the lounge adjacent to the executive floor, the three men remained seated in stunned silence. Crane's hand trembled as he reached for his secure line. "Get legal and investor relations on a call. Level red protocol," he ordered. Viner tapped away on his tablet, pulling up recent crew rosters and customer service logs. "She's not bluffing," he muttered. "She never was." Across the Atlantic in New York, alerts flashed in hedge fund offices. Sienna Brooks had paused the next tranche of investment. In return, Meridian Atlantic Holdings had committed to systemic change or risk losing every green tech investor. Automated watch lists triggered sell orders. By midday, Zurich time, the company's stock had dipped 12%. Analyst bulletins circulated. "Watch equity policy changes. Exposure from discrimination claims." Back in Zurich, legal teams convened in war rooms, drafting compliant language for press releases, preparing letters to passengers, outlining severance for implicated staff. At JFK, the lounge manager who'd refused Monica access to the dining room was escorted into HR, while the gate agent who'd flagged her onboarding pass was placed on administrative leave. The flight attendant who forced her to seat in 2C found her schedule cleared for 3 weeks. At Meridian's global conference 6 months later, Monica spoke at the Keynote, sharing her Flight 901 story to an audience of industry leaders. She closed with a line that brought the room to its feet. "Innovation isn't just about technology. It's about treating every person with the dignity they paid for. Because in the sky, as on Earth, there is no altitude so high that respect can't soar above it." In the end, no one remembered Flight 901 as a simple security check or seat assignment error. They remembered it as the moment a single passenger leveraged the power of equity to transform a legacy airline. And to the countless travelers who flew Meridian afterward, the cabin no longer felt like a stage of silent judgment. It felt like a space designed for everyone, because one woman refused to be hidden and insisted that the gates stay open at every altitude. Monica Wright paused at the head of the curved conference room table, her eyes sweeping the assembled team of frontline staff and senior executives. The air felt thick with the weight of unspoken regrets and stifled promises. She clenched her hands lightly at her sides, recalling the litany of slights she'd endured on that fateful flight. The gate agent's mistrust, the TSA officer's perfunctory frisk, the lounge attendant's casual dismissal, the seat swap demand, the clipped meal service, the whispered complaints of discomfort. Each indignity had built a barrier between her and the people who thought service meant suspicion. Now she stood before them, not as a passenger to placate, but as a decision-maker wielding corporate leverage. She inhaled slowly, the quiet click of her polished heels punctuating the stillness. "When I first boarded Flight 901, she began, voice steady and soft, "I paid the same fare as every other first-class traveler. I expected the same courtesy, the same respect." She paused, letting the words hang. "Instead, I became a test subject for your biases." Heads bowed and eyes flickered upward. "I didn't retaliate with anger. I simply paused the next $94 million 0 cents investment until you proved that your service matched your sales pitch." An audible intake of breath echoed around the room. William Crane, CFO of Meridian Atlantic, swallowed hard. Ms. Wright," he said, voice tight. Had you not offered us a chance to correct course, your suspension could have jeopardized our entire hydrogen fuel rollout." Monica nodded. "That would have been fair. Your processes failed me. You left me no choice but to wield the leverage at my disposal." She stepped forward, smoothing the sleeve of her suit. "Now, I'm here to ensure you never repeat those mistakes with any other passenger." She held up a thick binder. Meridian's new Service Equity Manual. Inside this manual are the policies you must enact. Standardized board and deplane scripts, universal lounge access protocols, mandatory equity training, real-time passenger feedback dashboards, and public quarterly scorecards. She placed it on the table with deliberate calm. "These are not suggestions. They are prerequisites for every contract, every investor meeting, every marketing campaign." Thomas Vayner, head of fleet strategy, leaned forward. "We appreciate your guidance, but these requirements are unprecedented in our industry. They will require retraining thousands of employees, costly system overhauls, and public transparency we've never offered." "I want to learn how to make it right." One by one, staff volunteers came forward. Gate agents, lounge concierges, TSA officers, check-in supervisors, each recounting a moment when they defaulted to prejudice. No one was shielded by rank. The raw honesty in that room was as powerful as any training module. Monica watched as trust slowly replaced denial, as shame morphed into resolve. 2 weeks later, Meridian Atlantic unveiled its first Equity in Action report at a press conference in New York. Monica stood beside the CEO as they announced initial compliance metrics: a 95% passenger satisfaction score across all classes, a 100% reduction in involuntary seat swaps, 0 verified complaints of biased service. In the preceding quarter, they rolled out the new Passenger Bill of Rights, co-authored with community advocates, guaranteeing transparent service standards and accessible grievance resolution processes. Reporters pressed the CEO for details. He pointed to Monica. "If you have questions," he said, "please ask her." She ensured this company could no longer ignore the people we serve. The media praised the move as unprecedented. Analysts downgraded the risk profile for Meridian's hydrogen initiative. Investors applauded the combination of innovation and integrity. Shares ticked upward as Wall Street responded to the company's newfound commitment to inclusion. Monica returned to her home in Manhattan that evening, feeling a quiet triumph. She had not set out for revenge, but for reform. But the outcome was a form of retribution so sweeping that it redefined the rules of engagement. She closed her eyes and pictured the passengers of Flight 911, the woman in pearls who assumed Monica was an assistant, the golf-shirted man who took her seat, the crew who saw bias as routine. They had been forced to reckon with the consequences of their actions, not through angry protest, but through irreversible policy change and financial risk. Months later, at a global aviation summit in Chicago, Monica delivered a keynote address titled Flight 901 and Beyond, the Business Case for Equity. She spoke of the moral imperative, but also of the bottom line. Companies that treat customers fairly outperform those that tolerate bias. The auditorium roared its approval. CEOs scribbled notes. Board members exchanged glances as though they were recalibrating their own corporate cultures. Backstage, a young flight attendant approached Monica. "Ms. Wright," she said, voice bright. "I was on Flight 145 last week. They greeted me by name, offered me every service without hesitation, and asked me for feedback at the end. I almost cried." Monica smiled and slipped the attendant a small card. "Keep telling your story," she said. "That's how change spreads." When she returned to her apartment, Monica looked out over the midnight city skyline and thought of that final scene in the Zurich training room. She remembered Marcy's question, "What about the passengers who could not speak back?" Monica's answer echoed in her mind, "Make room for them to be seen." She poured herself a cup of chamomile tea and sipped it slowly. The city lights sparkled below, each window a story, each passenger a voice. She had given them a stage. As she placed the empty cup on her marble countertop, she whispered to herself, "Every seat is a story, and I exist to listen." And with that, she allowed herself a moment of rest, knowing the real work of equity was not a one-time act but an ongoing journey, one conversation, one policy, one flight at a time.